Hello. Thank you, everyone.
Hey guys, I think I saw a few of you guys out at a bar last night, so I'm sure you want to get back to that. So we'll keep this pretty quick. We just want to let you guys know about Kickass teams. So as you said, this is Kito, I'm Amanda. We work for a mobile consulting firm that's headquartered in Austin, Texas. We've worked together for about 5 years, and many of the things we're going to talk to you about today are failures we've seen, and so hopefully you can learn so you don't have to make the same mistakes. So our goals for today are for you guys to learn what we think the characteristics of a great team are and how to improve yours.
So you've probably been overloaded with a lot of information with process and techniques and cool new tools. And so we've only got about 30 minutes to talk today. So we're going to talk about some kind of conceptual, fundamental things and less about specific processes. And really, like, what is the value? What is the point of having a team or even caring about a team? And so a big part of it, of what we found, is what you get. An advantage of having a great team is it's exceeding expectations. And that's, you know, in technical terms, some people call it non-deterministic or indeterminism. And this just means essentially 1 + 1 can equal more than 2. There's that ability to kind of have magic and exceed, you know, the predetermined plan. And go forward. And so kind of how I think about this, as a young child, I started out playing in a symphony orchestra. I was young, my skills weren't great, but I was learning, and it was very prescriptive. It was determined how we would perform the pieces. So I would receive a piece of music, something like this, where, you know, again, every person in that symphony was given the part to play, and it was predetermined what that was going to sound like, how long it was going to last, what the tempo was, and so forth. And that was great. I didn't necessarily understand all the fundamentals of why those notes were in that sequence or why it was written the way it was, but I was learning those techniques, and it was more about learning the muscle memory and practice. And now if you turn around the other kind of side of the coin a little bit, there's jazz music. And on the surface, these seem like fundamentally vastly different types of music with different approaches, and in some elements they are, but a key inspiration for jazz was symphony orchestra. It was, wow, that's such a rich sound produced by so many people. How can we get close to that and achieve something similar when we're a band of maybe 3 or 4 musicians? And this is similar to Toyota versus Ford back in, you know, many years ago. How could such a small, struggling company in a very small country without the wealth of resources that somebody like the Ford Motor Company had? That's a similar problem. Wow, that's a very large mountain to climb. How can we do more with less, faster, and produce higher quality? And so in a jazz band, usually it looks kind of something like this. There's a key theme. There's some things that are predetermined. Hey, here's a key element of what we're trying to accomplish. There's some ground rules and a foundation. Hey, it's swing. It's gonna feel a little bit like this. It's gonna be roughly in this time signature, in this key. But what happens in between those isn't necessarily predetermined. That piece could last for 3 minutes. It could last for 30 minutes, depending on the mood of the band, the skill level of the band, the temperature of the audience. Are they engaged? And so what this does is, again, there's a framework, so it allows people to collaborate, but the outcome is somewhat unpredictable. You have a goal, but if you're playing a game of probability, we've got the right pieces of the members of the band. We've got a good foundation that, you know, we have a mission in mind. We want to play this piece for an audience and perform, but we don't exactly know what it's going to be like. Sometimes it's going to sound bad. Sometimes it'll exceed expectations. Everybody will be completely blown away. Wow, I did not know that we could do that. And so having a kick-ass team, that's what you're looking for. And, you know, it's not as easy as just kind of laying a blueprint and saying this is how you do it, because, you know, much like this conference is centered around the human element, that you're never going to get away from that. Humans are always a part of anything we do, and humans are by nature unpredictable.
All right, so as you guys know, you've been to a lot of different panels and workshops, all these sort of things. You know that building stuff is actually getting easier right now. So here's just a few things, these really cool 3D printing, you have Internet of Things, Swift, all of that, that are allowing you to be able to build things faster. But if you look at it, it's actually becoming harder and harder to build great things. So it's really easy to get lost in all of this. What's important? What should I actually focus on? Where should I put all of my attention? And so how many of you have ever been on a project like this? You're burning 80 hours a week, it's 8 months delayed, and it's still never shipped. Anyone? It may not have been called Project Shit Canned, it might have been, I don't know. All right, so basically, one of the things that we found is that there's a lot of parts about a project that you can't change, but the team is something that all of you are part of and a place where you actually can make a huge difference. So what does a great team look like? We're gonna talk through this, but basically the two things that you should really understand are that a great team has a shared language, and they are composed of a collection of people that are not just specialists, but are interested in collaborating.
So to kind of achieve some of that, we use a framework called the Project Playbook, and we have a bunch of different techniques to kind of get to those answers and get that shared language with the team. But the point of it is kind of like the jazz piece of music, right? It's just laying that foundation of, look, we don't know all the steps and every piece that's gonna have to come together to build this product or to make it successful, but here's some things that we do know, and here's some kind of guidelines that we think we need to work within, and getting everybody to understand that. And the shared language thing is a really important point because, you know, as we said, there's all these tools, and in some ways we're kind of being torn because it does require a lot more specialization in certain areas. To be a great engineer, you've got to go deep in your language or your platform. To be a great designer, you've got to really dive into some specific methodologies and processes. But and by nature, that kind of ends up in not having a shared language. People start using their own acronyms and abbreviations, and engineers start developing their own language, and designers start developing their language, and the business people are speaking theirs. And so one of our first goals anytime we're kicking off a new project or getting a team is just to try to establish that common vernacular. So when somebody says customer, everyone has the same understanding of what customer means in this context. The developer is not thinking user, the business person isn't thinking consumer, and the designer is thinking buyer or something like this. So subtle, small things like that can really go a long way to having a really efficient communication with the team. So there's an old story. You know, so on the specialist thing, so it's a very common, you know, it's intuitive to think if I have a team of 12 specialists, they are going to solve the problem because they are the specialists in this area. But there's kind of a counter to that. There is group wisdom, which is different than group think. And so, Amanda, I'll let you tell a story about this one.
Sure. So this is a story from the 1900s, but basically there was a World's Fair type event going on where they put a bunch of farmers and butchers in front of a cow, and they said, how much does this cow weigh? And it was only specialists that they had at that point performing this task. And so they were putting that in, and there was a winner and all of that. But at the same time, a guy went around and asked 800 people in the audience to just write that down. These are just people who maybe had seen a cow before, but probably had no experience in actually weighing one. And it turned out that in the end, the collection of people came within an average of 1 pound off. And that was significantly closer than all of these specialists. And so what we're saying is not that you need a team of 100 people in order to build something, but that you shouldn't assume that just because something isn't in someone's specialty that they don't actually have a lot of just common knowledge and can learn from that. So we're going to go through and give you guys kind of 5 key points here.
Let me try it. This is my first Polish word that I learned. Holistically?
Nice.
Thanks. So, you know, it's a very soft thing and it sounds kind of esoteric, but it is an important thing. And thinking holistically is, you know, when a developer is writing that line of code, he's thinking about not just, wow, what's my unit test look like, and what's the commit revision number in Git. He's thinking about, how is that going to impact the user when it ends up in his hands? How is that going to impact the QA tester that's going to have to test that line of code that I wrote? When a designer is trying to figure out a user flow, they're not just thinking from the user's perspective, they're considering, wow, how's the developer going to have to go through this and implement this when it's time to build? And so, the counter sign of that is this. It's, hey, there's a problem that we have on this project, and the typical response is, okay, you go do this, you go do that, and you go do that. Well, if you kind of take advantage of that group wisdom, the team can help solve that problem, and they'll figure out who needs to divvy up the work or how they can break that up. But it's, you know, the common management problem is, oh, there's a problem, let's throw a lot of people at it and make sure they get busy right away.
The second one is small. And so this one often sounds easier than it actually is in practice, but we kind of think about team size as 2 pizza teams. This is not something we invented, comes from the Agile world, but the idea is that you should never be in a group of people that you're calling a team that you can't feed with 2 pizzas. they may not all agree on toppings, but you can get like the split and do that sort of thing. But the idea is that you really can't get to know someone and work on a problem if the team is really huge. And so when you look at this and you say, hey, my team is actually 80 people, how am I gonna do that? Or half my team's in Poland, half my team's in LA, how are we possibly gonna work together? The answer is just creating sub-teams. And so there's things like scrums and other things that allow you to take advantage of that. But what it does is it creates a space where you can't hide. So if you're on a small team, you know what everyone's doing without a whole bunch of formal processes. You can see the work on the wall. And the best thing about it is it limits the amount of work in progress. And so if one person gets stuck, it's not like we have 100 things going. We can all kind of swarm on that and finish it up. So keep your team as small as you can, and either that or you're gonna have to slice your pizza up really thin.
The other advantage to those small teams is there's more room to innovate because you're kind of containing your failure, right? So you can try new things and it's only gonna affect that small group of people, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to try Scrum now, or we're going to start using this new SDK and trying to make 40 people suddenly come onto this new process or this new tool. So breaking down those small teams is definitely a great place to start. There's a great book, then we'll have a reading list at the end of this deck that everyone can have access to, but there's a great book called Tribal Leadership that really digs into this stuff, and it talks about, hey, if you're trying to accomplish something and kind of build a community, don't go and talk to 50 people at once and say this is how it should be. Start with getting one other person to understand and find that common ground, and then bring in one other person, and then you can kind of spread that organically, and you'll tend to find that people will be much more engaged as opposed to somebody saying this is how things are going to be and this is how this whole team is going to run.
And I don't know if I made this point clearly, but this two-pizza team is definitely not a team of just designers or just engineers. The idea is definitely to have a lot of cross-functional knowledge on it. So the third one is the shared language. And Kito already hit on this a little bit, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term of a pigeon language. Anyone heard of that one? Yeah, got a few back there? So I ran into this problem yesterday. I, unlike Kito, don't speak Polish. He's got his one word, I have zero. And I was trying to order a cup of coffee, and the woman at the counter spoke no English, I spoke no Polish. But within a matter of seconds, we were able to conduct that transaction. We basically figured it out through gestures of pointing, and she pointed at money and was helping me with that. And so that may sound silly on a project, but you run into a lot of things where I immediately start talking in acronyms that the UX team might be familiar with. You know, we're talking about user personas, and maybe Kito's talking about a PRD and all these acronyms that no one's heard of. I was on a project recently actually where we had been using an acronym for so long and forgot to explain it to someone that the very first thing that someone asked was, what is this acronym? And so you have to be really careful about that, because it's really easy to forget that, and if you're not coming up with that shared language together, then you're pretty much unable to talk to one another. So another way of thinking about that is domain-driven design.
So just, the team speaking each other using a shared language and they can have a really efficient way to communicate, that's great. If that's working really well, that can go very deep and you can actually apply that right down to the code. The names of your classes, the names of your methods are the same language that, the business person is talking about, or the UX designer, or the person doing user research. They're all using the same words, again, right down to the code. And, there's, BDD, I don't know if people are familiar with that, but I would highly recommend looking into that, and that's a really powerful
what's
thing.
that acronym mean?
Oh, BDD is behavior-driven development. And so what that does is, suddenly you'll develop this language, and even just through the course of conversation with the team, hey, what should this functionality look like? What are the acceptance criteria, these types of things? You start typing this out in human, understandable, in layman's terms, really, and it starts building up this kind of strong foundation where you've got acceptance criteria, test plans, the user journey, all encapsulated in this language that everyone can really understand, and it's testable, which is really awesome.
Cool. All right, the fourth point that we wanted to make was a team should be accountable to one another. So you often get into this situation where you find out that part of the team is actually only worried about what their boss thinks or what their silo thinks. So in our organization, we have a matrix organization, which means that we have both project teams and functional teams. So I'm part of the design department, Kito's part of the engineering department, but we both work on the same project together. And if you're not careful on a team, I might actually be much more worried about my career path than on being accountable to this project. And so by understanding that and building a team around that and actually creating some accountability within that team itself, you can actually, you can help each other out. And so it becomes something more about being accountable to the team and to the project rather than to external forces like the boss. And so that was kind of what that non-deterministic point as well. Basically, you can get something much greater if you're being accountable to yourself. If you're thinking about it from whether the boss is happy, you very often are just meeting the minimum criteria and then going home for the day.
The sign that you don't have this on a team is when you hear something like, well, that's not my job. Hey, I found a bug. Well, that's not my job. So that's something to look out for. I mean, that's if you have a good team and they feel accountable to each other, you will never hear that because they want to make sure that the engineer who gives his code to the QA tester and the QA tester finds a bug, if they're accountable to each other, the engineer's going to feel a little bad, like, oh man, I should have thought about that, or hey, maybe our tests are incomplete. Let's address that issue. And this one's super easy and probably the lowest hanging fruit if you want to kind of really rally your team is just having information radiators. And that's just getting things on the wall that everybody's looking at the same thing. I mean, we all work on our laptops and our screens and we all have our own little setups and ways of working. And it's really easy to kind of get isolated in your own world and forget what, everybody else is kind of, there's nothing to rally around on the team. Kind of a good example, a real world example is we were developing a large payment system over the course of like 18 months. And there was an iOS team and an Android team. And about 3/4 of the way through the project, we started to accumulate a lot of technical debt, and there was a lot of bugs on the Android side. iOS team was doing pretty good. Well, we said, okay, what can we do about this? We started talking to the Android team. Well, they started saying all the reasons why it was the case. So we said, okay, well, let's just throw up a screen. So we got a screen, not this big, I wish, but it was about this big. Just put it on the wall and said, okay, well, here's the iOS bug count. Here's the Android bug count. And, at the time, before we did that, the Android team said, well, God, this is going to take about 3 months to kind of get out of this hole. We've got a lot of debt. Within 2 weeks, they caught up. Within 2 weeks. Nobody said, you guys have to hurry up and catch up. It was just purely making it visible. And all of a sudden, the iOS guys would come over and help them. Hey, we noticed that you were working on that one bug. We had a similar issue. And just something as simple as just them seeing it without anybody telling them to cooperate or collaborate, it just happened because some person decided to care a little bit. Wow, the Android team's struggling. Let me go see. Maybe I can help them out.
And imagine trying to land on the moon if everyone's looking at their very own dashboard there. Certainly not going to happen. Other things that we put on the wall are quotes from users on social media. You can use this for inspiration. We put the launch day up. That seems like an obvious one, but it's amazing how if all you're thinking about is kind of your day-to-day activity, you don't even understand where you're heading. That's an easy one. Failing tests, what work is in progress, easy things like that.
And even the high-level stuff that's easy to gloss over if you're kind of an individual on a team, like the product vision. That's a vision statement on the wall. That's, hey, why did you come to work today? What's the point of you writing all that code or designing all those screens? When people kind of understand and internalize like the purpose of what they're doing, they will again rally. The quote I like is I think it might have been JFK, I forget. He asked the janitor at NASA back in the 60s, what are you doing? And he said, I'm putting a man on the moon. And he was mopping the floor, but that's the reason he was mopping the floor is to get somebody on the moon. He wasn't mopping the floor because that's what he had to do until 6 p.m.
My other favorite information radiator, if you can pull it off, is to get a cardboard cutout of your user and put that so that as you walk in the door every day, everyone remembers who you're building for. It's amazing how powerful it is if you have to look that user in the eye every single morning when you get off the elevators and then try to not care about them.
There's a few companies that do that really well, like SAP and I think Netflix still does it, but the main door you walk in, you almost bump into a life-size cutout of their personas. And it's so everybody that walks in the building is forced to think every day, oh yeah, that's why I'm here, is I got to make that guy happy.
Another thing that I'm sure you guys are familiar with is pair. This is a couple of guys doing some pair programming, but my very favorite thing is try this anytime you're stuck on a bug. The next time if you're an engineer and you're stuck on a bug, explain that bug to a designer. Within 5 minutes, the bug will be solved. I have yet to see this one fail. Either
100% of the time so far. I want to see it fail once.
Either because the designer instantly looks and they're like, wait, doesn't it look like there should be a semicolon there because they can see the patterns in it? Or because when the developer actually explains it in a different language than they might use explaining it to another engineer, they suddenly, within a second, roll their eyes and realize that they fixed the bug themselves. They understand it now that they're looking at it. Same thing with design. So some people were talking about creating a living style guide. One thing I've noticed is that designers, when they're in Photoshop, they get really excited about different font sizes, all of that thing, that sort of thing. But if you have a designer and an engineer working really closely together, they do things like, the engineers often will find things like, hey, this is actually only one pixel size smaller than that one. Is it really that important? And the designer, if they have a good relationship, will realize that, yeah, actually, that was kind of a mistake or an oversight. We could simplify this, and it makes it much easier when you're building something to have that shared design document. All right, the last one, building empathy.
Empathy is probably a buzzword that gets overused a little bit, so it's kind of easy to forget what it is. I think about it like, so when we started Mutual Mobile, it was, the goal right out of the gate was, hey, we want to have designers and engineers working together. So me being very confident and I had a great plan, you guys will sit together and it'll be great and you'll figure it out. I mean, it's not that simple. The designers are immediately thinking, God, I can't even talk to this person. They're thinking about completely other things and focused on other problems than I am. But if you poke at them a little bit and say, it's not that the designer has to learn how to be an engineer or the engineer has to learn all the knowledge and all these design skills. It's more about just understanding what they have to go through during the course of a day to accomplish their job. And just pairing them together, it can see that, oh, wow, it took you that long for you to accomplish that task. Now, as a designer, I'll understand if I'm going to ask you to do something completely unreasonable, hey, can you redo this screen by tomorrow? Something like that, and vice versa. So if a developer, when you get handed a design by somebody else and there's no conversation, it's very easy to start picking it apart like, oh, stupid designer, they put the button over here, why did they do that? But if they're sitting together and they can kind of see the problems that designer's working through, there's empathy. Oh, I get it. I see why he came to that conclusion. Or I see he came to that conclusion and he had a missing piece of information. Hey, did you know if you move it down here, that's going to save me half a day of work and I can get it done tomorrow? So those types of conversations and just really understanding kind of what everybody on the team has to go through to produce value. And empathy, not just amongst the team, but also thinking about how the user's going to respond to this and where are their heads at. And everybody has bosses and stakeholders that put unreasonable demands down. Take a second and just think about, well, why would they ask for something so unreasonable? And you may not always like the answer and you may not always agree with it, but at least you'll have some sort of place to kind of think and identify with, okay, well, I can kind of see why they made that unreasonable request. And now I can at least, next time, maybe I can get ahead of that and help it.
So a really good way of doing this is to sketch. So anybody who came to our workshop, we had a lot of engineers in the workshop and we've forced people to sketch pretty much the whole time. And so people tend to think of sketching as a designer's task. I am supposedly a designer, but I'm a terrible sketcher in the sense of like being able to create artwork or anything beautiful like that. But the idea is just to be able to get out of your personal space and take it to a whiteboard and actually work together on a problem. This is another technique that we used in the workshop and we use a lot when we're starting out with new teams is simply a robot sketch. So the point of this is to get the team to break the ice in a non-digital way. You just have everyone sit around the table, everyone draws themselves as a robot. You can include things like a cup of coffee or music notes or whatever it is that makes you feel valuable or things that are important to you as a person. And it's just a really quick way to get everyone sketching and have that become a core part of your team. Some other techniques for this, this is a little bit longer, but this is called the Drucker Exercise. It's not something we created, it's something you can find out more about, but basically it's these 4 questions that you ask a team. It takes about an hour to do well, and you sit down and you really say, who are you as a person and how are you gonna be on this team? And so this is less about like specifically what are your day-to-day tasks going to be, but more what do you care about on this particular project? What's important to you? So maybe the last project you were on completely failed because no one cared about code quality. And you can let people understand that, hey, this is really important to me. But it also can be some more subtle things like the fact that if you try to talk to Kito before he's had his first cup of coffee in the morning, he's gonna act like a complete jerk. But if you give him a cup of coffee, he's a totally awesome guy. And I have the problem of talking through problems out loud. And so when I let a team know that, they realize that as opposed to me giving directives, I'm actually just trying to get people to think with me. And so those are things that on the outset might have been like us being angry at each other. But once I realized that, it's no big deal. Hey, let's move the meeting 30 minutes. Let's let him check his email. Hey, I need a whiteboard and we need someone to document the results of this conversation. Things that are easy but get overlooked, and you find a lot of sort of anger in a team can build if you don't kind of level set that empathy at the beginning. Another great one, I'm sure all of you guys are doing this, hopefully, retrospectives. We use the start, stop, continue method for this. But the idea is that the best group of people to change the process within any organization, people talk methodology, there's all these new things coming out, but the only people who can actually change their process is that team itself. And so taking that time on a weekly basis or every other week, whenever you're at a good stopping point, to really sit back and say, hey, what did we do and what's working, what's not, and think about it from a process perspective, not just the project specifically. Someone actually suggested this in the workshop to me, and I thought this was great. They have a part of their retrospective where they actually ask if there's anything personal going on in people's lives. And that can be uncomfortable, but if you ask that, it suddenly makes a lot more sense why someone's leaving at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe they have something going on where you could help them out for a little while. And so those aren't always the easiest questions to ask, but if you make it part of your routine, it gets it to where you're talking to each other like people, which is a big part of that. So. Kick-ass teams. They think holistically, they stay small, they speak a shared language, they're accountable to each other, and they have empathy. It's not a silver bullet. Obviously, there's a lot more to a project, but we feel like these things and the fact that everyone in this room is part of a team in some way are places where you can actually make a huge difference in your life. And so, let's see.
So, this is, I think, part of these teams and some of these philosophies and methodologies and things that we're talking about is, like we said, every project and every human is different. Every team is different. And so there is not a blueprint and just kind of one size fits all. But if you get used to these and start asking yourself these questions, or anytime you go and you get a new job or you join a new team, if you start kind of thinking about these things and asking these questions and thinking about the humans that you have to work with, you start to develop a feel for, when you do meet that dream team or you meet your perfect co-founder or whatever it is, you can get kind of some of that messy stuff out of the way and start being efficient right away. And that's really the key of it there, is just efficiency. And so, if you're on a really bad team on a bad project, well, get through it as quick as you can, make it efficient. And if you do get lucky and you land that dream job, or you have the great idea and you have your founding team, like, get ready and don't waste time trying to butt heads on personal conflicts and process and all this stuff. Like, get to the meat of the matter and really do great work.
All right. Anybody have any thoughts?
All right. Any questions?
I may ask the first question.
All right.
How do you deal with a guy in your team that he's a really valuable guy? You really know that he's smart. He adds a lot to the team, but he's a total asshole.
Yeah.
And you don't choose him, and you have to work with him, but you really try to avoid every situation when you have to interact with him.
Sure.
I usually start by trying to figure out what he's motivated by. Not to stereotype developers, but developers are the ones that, in my experience, are most prone to be kind of grouchy.
Oh, designers have it too.
In a different way. It manifests itself in a different way. But I would start to figure out what motivates them. Usually, a lot of times for developers, when they're in that mindset, I found that they're bored. They're not really solving very hard problems, and so they just... They want to hurry up and move past it because they don't want to talk to the team. It's just very second nature to them. Another one that I've seen is they assume that no one understands. It's the empathy thing. They assume like, oh, you're asking me that stupid question. You don't know anything about architecture and you don't understand my problems. And so they kind of tend to be gruff or really terse like that way. So if you can figure out what motivates them and you can figure out a little bit of kind of, why are you so grouchy? Are you just an unhappy person in general? And if they are, that's not a business problem to solve. It's just, okay, well, maybe we just set that guy over here and we'll come up with a process where we can limit the amount of interaction we have with him, but he's still providing some value and maybe he's happier working that way as well. So again, not a perfect answer, but I would always start with like personally what is he trying to accomplish in his job? And sometimes the answer is just, he's just a grouchy person and he hates his job and there's not much you can do about that other than, if it's probably going to be a detriment to the team at some point and just kind of raising that. And I think more than one person will start to see the same problem. Like, wow, this guy is really hard to work with. Nobody wants to come into work every day. Can we at least just start making sure that everyone knows this is a problem? And then maybe we can start to address it later.
And one thing we found in general is that if someone's just a rock star, but they're a terrible team player, in the end, they're a bad fit for the company. And I know that's not something like as a team member you can always have a big impact in, but if you have the opportunity to be setting up a team, definitely look at that. Is really someone that valuable? It's almost never the case that even if they are that much of a specialist, that having them on the team is that important. In that case, being able to hire a contractor to do a very specific job but not try to incorporate them in the team is actually a lot easier than, like if they're just the type of person who is not interested in any of this, you may have better luck not trying to force them into the team.
Then any other questions? Okay, then I will have the second one. Oh, no.
So
They
we
just
did a
want
really
beer.
poor
Where's the
job
beer?
provoking curiosity if there's no questions.
What is the
Hello.
what is the ratio of designers and developers, and do you sort of play around with kind of when design rolls on and when developers roll on?
Sure. It depends on the project for sure. There's certainly projects that are incredibly technically complex, so the ratio of designers might be a little low, especially when we're doing like hardware integration or something like that. We'll have more back-end and specific engineers. But as a general rule, if we have a team of
Probably about one
One
to
to five?
3, 1 to 5, somewhere in there, depending. I think how I usually approach it is I start with as few people as possible that kind of represent all the disciplines. So I usually, any new project, I'll try to have 3 people specifically, design, technology, and business or strategy represented. And then depending on the state of that, and that'll kind of determine who we bring on next and the composition of that team.
As far as like when they roll on, as much as possible, we start the team at the exact same time. If people get too far ahead, it's really hard to add new team members. That I would say that's the goal, but on every single project I've worked on, you know, someone leaves the company or we hire someone new and you have to bring people into it. And so taking your time to redo the Drucker exercise, especially if you have a whole bunch of new team members, and I know we didn't talk too specifically about the playbook, but having that shared knowledge and taking the time to really onboard new team members so that they understand the common mission will make it to where there's not kind of this in-group and these new people.
One thing on that, it takes a lot of conversation with clients, but even not that long ago, we were working on it was strictly a service, a back-end service, and I had a UX designer on the team. And so it's more important to me that everybody's represented all the way through, because I'll trust them to say, hey, I need a lot more design help over here. I'll trust the technical person to say, we're understaffed and we need more developers. So I'm really adamant about having all those things represented all the way through, and then how much those ratios can kind of flux based on the needs.
Hi, I have a question about your experience with office layout. Does your team work in open space or more in closed rooms, or how do you organize your office?
It's one of my favorite questions ever.
You want to answer it?
So I think, I believe that everybody went a little too hard on the open office concept. I love it, but not everybody works that well that way. There are people that, you know, need to have that headphones on, quiet time to do their best work. So we've tried to, so we started with the extreme where everything was completely open, and now we started to evolve it a little bit where there are those kind of quiet areas and individual workspaces so we can get the best of both worlds. But the key to that is just having a really good methodology so you can have those opportunities where you can kind of converge and diverge, right? So there you get the time in the open workspace, get the heated dialogue and really active, energetic conversations going, and then allow areas where they can say, okay, break, everybody knows what needs to be done now, now go and work the way that you work best. Sometimes that could be go working from home, sometimes that could be working from the coffee shop, or a lot of people stay in the open space. It just, we like to leave it flexible a little bit.
Hey there. So do you guys have any recommendations for maybe someone who's in an environment that isn't most conducive to this optimal way of working? So I've worked in a lot of different environments, and sometimes you're like the one person that wants to bring that change in. Do you have any kind of suggestions for how to hack the environment so that you can kind of build that into a larger culture?
I love that term, by the way, hacking the environment. That's a good one.
I think the information radiators is the easiest one. If you can put something up that everyone is curious about, especially if it's not something that's gonna be the bug count or something that might immediately kind of turn everyone off. If you can put something positive of shared quotes, things like that, people tend to, new things in the space people will go and be curious about and start to look at. And that's a good way to have shared conversations. The other one, and this is something I think, is to kind of, maybe this is a weird way of saying it, but to play dumb sometimes. So if I'm working on a design and I really want someone to engage with me, I'll be as stuck as I can and like really grab someone and say like, hey, I'm completely stuck, and get like engage with them on a whiteboard on something that I'm working on, that allows them to kind of come into my space and helps them build empathy on accident with me by understanding what it is that I'm struggling with. And so I might not be able to go up to an engineer and immediately be like, hey, what are you programming there? You know, that might be a little bit too much of an invasion of space, but if you can bring them into your environment and have them help you, then they feel like they're part of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think my take on that is, I mean, I work with Nike a lot, so this is going to sound bad, but just do it, you know what I mean? Like, so like the information readers is a great thing. Like I tried a long time ago when I first got introduced to Kanban. Okay, guys, we're going to do Kanban now. And it failed. People didn't really, like, they didn't make that choice that they were going to do it. And so then many months later, I just put a Kanban board up for my own stuff, just my own personal work, a personal Kanban board. Somebody like came by, hey, what is that? Oh, that looks pretty cool. I'm going to do that. They did it personally. And then within like a month, like a team had their whole board on a wall, you know, and they started modeling their own process out. And, you know, I think, like Amanda said, just getting something out that can provoke a little curiosity and like start the conversation at least, even if it's wrong. Like a good example is like a developer who maybe they don't get to work with any designers and they're just on a dev team. Make up a persona and ask, hey, is this, I don't know who the user is this right? And sometimes just throwing out the wrong answer out there will cause somebody else to come in and say, no, that's wrong. Here's actually who the user is. And then boom, okay, cool. Let's have a workshop and like make a persona or something like that. So.
Okay, you showed us the example of some those questions and like who am I, who I am, what I value, and so on. Can you tell us something more about it? And especially, I wonder if you do this really like frequently. You set up a new team and you do this, or is it a one-time thing?
Every new team, you know, it's or if a new team member is joining an existing team, we'll have them do it again, just so they can kind of understand what that person's motivated by.
Do you do this like for the whole team or only for him?
For the whole team, because that's the value, is you want the other team to understand. So if you're joining my team, I want to know, oh, you're motivated by, you want to create the best new algorithms out in the world, or you want to solve the hardest problems, or you want to make users really happy. We want the whole team to kind of understand that so we can understand where to best engage you. Oh, we know that he's super passionate about user research. Like, we know we need research. Let's ask him to do that, you know.
Hi guys, I got a question. How old was the oldest member of your Kickass team you work with? And a second question: did you find the integration of millennials and X generation members and baby boomers problem ever?
All the time, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it comes back to that shared language and just getting, I mean, I hate to keep repeating the same answer, but like I approach that problem is exactly, I've been on a Kickass team with people that were far older than me and they were like my mentors. And I've been on Kickass teams with people that had never worked in big enterprise and they were just out of school. And it's much harder to have a combination of the both. And I start with that of like, you know, because again, usually the millennials, they are, you know, the perception is they just like to have fun and, you know, they don't work as hard and they're not as diligent, but that's not true. They just approach problems much differently. And so it gets back to just letting them both put out on the table, on paper, this is what's important to me, this is how I want to work. This is what's important to me, this is how I want to work. Okay, let's see. Yes, there's going to be some conflicts, but Courtney from Carbon 5 had a great point in her talk yesterday. Conflict is good. Get that out, but it's only bad if it's just internalized and no one's actually talking about it. So if you can get it out on the table, hey, I don't want to work with you, millennial, because you're looking on Twitter all day and you leave at 4 p.m. every day. And the millennial can say, well, yeah, I look at Twitter all day, but yeah, and I leave at 4 p.m., but I also work until 3 a.m. every night. And so just getting those things, letting them have that conversation usually is a good place to start.
One question up there.
What about people who work from home? You can make a Kickass team, including someone who works from home.
The fun part about this is I now work from home, so I can answer that. So we just started the LA office, and so I don't work with the team on a daily basis anymore in a physical way, but we use things like Slack and Google Hangouts. I'm probably on a Google Hangout 5 or 6 times a day with the team, and so you still have the ability to be part of the team. I think it would be really difficult to have started with that. I think the fact that that we had some kickoff meetings and we got the project started in person is really awesome. And so as much as you possibly can, getting that team together to do a kickoff and do some of these exercises as a team will help that, because it's kind of hard to build empathy over the phone or over Google Hangouts, but I've certainly seen it work. And as far as information radiators, in that case, it may need to be digital. So we use Trello for a lot of things, like I said, Slack, that it allows us to post things so that everyone has that same look.
More and more, depending on the individuals and depending on the working style, even if it's one person, working in a time zone, I would encourage that person to kind of operate as if he was a one-person team. So meaning, what you're trying to avoid is just people blocking each other from making progress. So depending on how quick their communication lines are, their feedback loops are, I might encourage that person to not be online 8 hours a day and communicating in real time because he's maybe working on his own tasks. I might encourage him more to take more of a Scrum's approach. Just maybe once a day, hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish today, as opposed to here's all the tasks I'm going to do and here's all the dependencies between the rest of my team members. But again, it depends on if you have the right tools and you're in the same time zone, you can achieve very close to the face-to-face collaboration. But once you start going across multiple time zones and depending on how complex the work is, it can be difficult to truly operate that as a team. And I would generally split them up by location, even if they are individuals. There was I forget who coined it, but somebody introduced me to this concept. They called it the rule of threes, where if you're sitting right next to a person and you have a problem to solve or a question, it takes about 3 minutes to maybe get an answer. If they're, a floor above you or in the next office, it may take 30 minutes to find each other and resolve that question. As soon as you introduce a new time zone, that can suddenly take 3 hours. If they're on another continent, suddenly it can take 3 days to kind of resolve the same problem. So all those things you just have to consider those and try to find out, really just figure out the quickest you can have the feedback loops and the communication lines.
And if anyone can figure out how to share a pizza remotely, I'm interested.
I have a question. Do you have any employees, for example, designers that work in 2 teams at one time, so they are part-time in one team and part-time in the other team, and how this influences the work of them and the energy of the team and so on?
Yeah, I mean, the more split you are across projects, the less you can be a part of any team. And so that can, there's a few ways to approach it. Like Kito said, try to have one person who's dedicated to it from that discipline, who's representing it the whole time. Yeah, maybe you need to pull in a specific person or that sort of thing, but then make sure the expectation is that the team understands who's part of the core team and who they're kind of relying on differently. Because that can be really frustrating if you don't lay out hey, here's my availability, here's what you should expect from me. So even doing the Drucker exercise, that can be a good way to do that of, hey, I'm a designer, I'm split onto 2 teams, making that really at the forefront and being very honest about how you will split your time and what your team should expect from you.
I usually try to force somebody to be clear about the priority too, because even if you say you're going to work half on this project and half on this project, there's always going to be a time where they're going to conflict. So I would usually ask somebody representing the business to, okay, I'm on 2 projects now. Let's be honest, which one is truly more important? And that can be a hard one to get to, but if you know that, you can tell the teams that too. Hey team, I'm working with 2 teams right now, so this one is a little more urgent, so if I'm not available, that is why, because I'm working on this one. So again, just get it out in the open and let everybody know what the priorities are.
Are there any more questions? Thank you very much, Dan. You can always get them during the break.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.